what was key is what you said right at the beginning. You said that basically, as far as the mainstream or what's talked about in public discourse or what's shown on TV, has mainly been a strong lean towards the conservative end. I mean, I believe some people used to call it supply side. This is going to be the Chicago school and their ilk from I guess, the older generation. Maybe somebody else or new schools have inherited that torch, you know, per se, and have carried it on. But kind of, that is actually separate from the vast body of work from the academic profession, correct?
Oh, I'm not so sure. I think the Chicago school has become much more influential in academic economics than it was 30 or 40 years ago. What basically happened coincides with the change in the political climate in the United States. From the early middle 20th century, the middle third of the 20th century, the 1930s into the late 1970s, there was a broad consensus in the United States and in the world that a functioning economic system needed a strong government, needed well-run trade unions, and needed what my father in a book in 1952 called countervailing power. And that you really needed to have regulations that advanced the public interest, and that kept the market under a reasonable degree of control in order to protect the environment, in order to protect consumers, in order to protect workers, and against a whole set of very well documented problems. Well, after about 1980, the mainstream in American politics and in American academic economics took the position that regulations had become burdensome, that the costs exceeded the benefits, and that the market could regulate itself, and proceeded to attack and in many cases dismantle the regulatory structures. Not everything that was done there was bad. There were some regulatory structures that were obsolete and could be safely removed, but there were others that were essential, including especially financial regulation. And when financial institutions are deregulated, they tend to get the system tends to run out of control, and it tends to open up the field for con men, sharp dealers, crooks, thieves, actually. And there were a great many of those, both in the savings and loan crisis in the 1980s and in the run-up to the financial crisis in 2007.
So at the beginning of what you just said, you actually feel like that the conservative side has actually grown. See, if you follow some of these people's writings, I'm not actually trying to counteract what you're saying. I'm just saying I was actually shocked to hear that. This is a revelation to me. I figured that side would be dying because of the empirical.
Well,
a lot of the empirical data for some of their stuff.
You might think that would be the case if you were, let's say, evidence or reality-based. But academic economics really isn't evidence-based, and it isn't reality-based. It's a kind of tribal structure where, in order to advance, you have to publish in particular journals which are controlled by particular ideological factions. And so there's a very rigid hierarchy of positions and a very rigid set of rules that have come to govern access to those positions. It's not at all like the situation in the post-war period when economics departments were havens for extremely interesting and diverse people with very different scientific and methodological formations. It's all become really quite uniform. And as a result, at the moment, in the almost 10 years now since the financial crisis, when the economics profession was really shown to be clueless about some of the most important problems that the country faced, there's come to be a kind of divide between academic economics and the real world, a kind of a situation in which your economics professor simply does not want to talk about the problems that their students have been living through for their entire conscious lives. So it's a very interesting and difficult problem, I think, from a let's say standpoint of an educator, of how you go about creating an education in economics that's actually useful for people.